Tuesday training for practitioners. Oh, I'm so glad I'm going to have some folks here with me live in the house. Welcome. This is where we meet every week, where manual and movement practitioners meet every week to talk everything and train on structural balancing, functional anatomy, anything client related, because we like to get our clients out of pain. So I'm so glad to have you guys here for another week of I know you guys got just another pop-up, Cheryl. Thanks for handling that. I'm your host for the time together here today. I am Gina Schatz, and I am both a manual and movement practitioner. I'm here to share with you exactly how I work and have worked for over 3 decades now, getting clients out of pain clinically. And I want to share that with you so that you can do the same thing. So welcome. I'm so glad that you guys are here. Thanks for being in the club seat today, Cheryl. I'm glad that you're here. I know, Gary, you're here too in the back, and I know some of you are here on YouTube. If you're here watching live on YouTube with us, please do let me know. I'd love to know that you're here. I know that you guys like to hang out there. Here we go. I can see the chat efficiently, and I'm sure you could just hear that too. So I got all my text set up. We're ready to go. We're going to talk today about when to know whether you should be using the lever system or when you want to be using reciprocal inhibition. And the idea of reciprocal inhibition, it's a mouthful. And what's the difference? Like, how should I know that? There's actually a clear path to knowing when you should use each one. They both serve different purposes. And I like to have both of them in my back pocket because it creates efficiency for me when I'm working. So that's why I want to share with you the difference. You can't go wrong with either one. There's just a quicker path, if you will, from using one over the other. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Lever system or reciprocal inhibition, knowing which one is which. It's going to start feeling like some client work as we navigate the answer to that question, which also excites me because I know it excites you guys. So that's what we're going to cover today. Welcome, Gary. Welcome, Cheryl. Glad you guys are here in the club seats. Welcome to all of you who are here. Kathy, you're here. Okay, great. Welcome to all of you who are here watching on YouTube. Thanks for letting me know that you're here. I love knowing that you guys are here with us by name. You don't have to let me know if you're here by name, but even if you are on the replay, I'd love to know that you guys are here. It helps me to know what you guys are studying. Lisa's joining us today too in the club seats. It's very exciting. Helps me to know what you're studying and what you're looking for so that I can feed you exactly what would be perfect for you. So I usually have some good ideas, and I also love to hear from you directly as well. Welcome, Lisa. Glad you're here in the club seats. So before we dive into the depth of our training today, a just reminder here on Pin It to Win It. It's our favorite game that we like to play while we're here live or on the replay. Either way, as long as you're here watching. Pin It to Win It is literally just a way to get extra training. So as you play, I give you more training. There's no strings attached to that. Some folks have asked, well, like, what do I have to do? Nothing. It's my way of rewarding you for being so committed to being here and training and gulping it all in and utilizing it right away and creating results with your clients. So I just want to acknowledge you for your commitment for being here until the end. So if you are here till the end, hey, Rhonda, glad you're here. If you are here to the end and you want to play Pin It to Win It, you'll see that I post letters at the bottom of the screen throughout the training. Collect all those letters. They spell a word. Put the word in the comment section below the YouTube video. Comment section on the YouTube channel below this exact video. And then once I see your pin and you win, I will ship you over some extra training. No strings, just a, hey, I see you working hard and you got this. So that's how we play Pin It to Win It. If you notice these things popping up middle of the way, it's also a good, it's usually, I use it as a punctuation now. Okay, breathe, pause, we're gonna move on. And then we pin and then we breathe and pause and we move on. So that's how you play, that's how you win. Let's get into it. You guys ready to get into our content for today? Reciprocal inhibition or lever system. Hey, Val, I'm glad you're here too. It's nice to have you guys all here with me. Okay, so last week we talked at length about reciprocal inhibition, and I love it. I love reciprocal inhibition. It gives us a lot of clarity around exactly how we're designed to move, and also for the manual practitioners in the house, exactly what's going off on that movement, so what we should target. So reciprocal inhibition is this, beautiful body of content that we can study around our own body, and it lets us know where we should focus next. Again, whether you are a manual practitioner or a movement practitioner, it applies. And I got feedback after training last week, which I was very happy to get, that reciprocal inhibition felt simpler last week. I hope it did for you guys. Did it for you guys? Anybody here who was live or on the replay? Did reciprocal inhibition feel simpler last week as we parsed it out? Gary was a yes. Okay, good. I'm happy to hear that for you. Beautiful. And I also heard feedback from that same practitioner who was sharing with me that there was a place along the reciprocal inhibition exploration route where it got a little fuzzy. And you're like, uh-oh, I think I just got lost in the sauce. I think I'm in the weeds a little bit here. And in that moment, a few times last week, I said, if this is what's happening for you here, totally fine. Don't panic. But just know that this is the part of the lever system that you want to go back to, so that you can then take that information and pour it right back into reciprocal inhibition to know what to do with it. My experience teaching reciprocal inhibition, while I love it and it's so juicy and valuable, is that there's lots of moving parts, pun intended, and we can get a little bit like, that's a lot. I don't know if I kind of got all that. And that's normal, guys. It's normal. I'm not talking down to you. I'm literally helping you like get clarity in your own information loader. And so at any point in time, you're like, yeah, I got it, Gina. Yeah, I got it. The muscle contracts. Got it, got it, got it. And then like in the next minute, you could feel like you're a little overwhelmed. That happens a lot. I've noticed that happened for me. It happens a lot with reciprocal inhibition. So I just want to offer, as we're moving through today on, do we do lever system? Do we do reciprocal inhibition? You might want to have a full handle around reciprocal inhibition so that you can answer that question for yourself. And if you're still grasping for that full handful, great, go grasp for it. Go back and watch last week, review it again until you're like, I got it. I know all the parts. I know the part that they play. I got it. And then you can start using that information to troubleshoot with. So we're moving today into the troubleshooting phase, and you got to know what the parts are before you can troubleshoot them. And I've said this before too, especially to my mastery practitioners. I know you guys want to solve the problem. I'm here for that. Believe me, I'm here for that. I'm the problem solver. That's all I like to do. But in order to solve the problem, you need to know the anatomy and how it's designed so that you know when it's not working the way it's designed and then what to do about it. You can't go into something's wrong, it's not working the way it's designed, and then know what to correct if you don't know what the design is. I mean, it sounds kind of simple when we do the math in that way, but the same thing goes for reciprocal inhibition. Just take the time that you need and review it, because once you have it, you can't unhave it. And then you'll be able to solve all types of functional mechanics, all types of, discrepancies there. So we're in that place today. If you start to feel a little overwhelmed, that's okay. You have a replay, but if you're ready for it, it's going to feel really super fun. It's going to be fun either way. It's going to be fun either way. What am I talking about? It's going to be fun either way. All right. Reciprocal inhibition. We talked about extension of the hip probably a few weeks back, and it might even have been when we were on lever system. So when we are working with any joint action, both the lever system and reciprocal inhibition apply, like simultaneously, because the lever system is part of reciprocal inhibition. And what I want to parse out for us today is, well, how do I know if I need all of reciprocal inhibition or if I just need to know the lever system and then I'm good? Sometimes I only focus on the lever system. You guys know that because I teach you. And sometimes I say, well, hey, wait a minute. What about the guys who help out? What about reciprocal inhibition? Why not consider those? So I'm not changing my mind necessarily and trying to freak you guys out. There's just times when all you need is the lever system. So you don't need to make it more complicated. In the application clinically, you need to know it. You need to always know it. But do you need to go into all the details of it right now while you're working clinically? Sometimes straight up lever system can get you the solution you're up to. You don't need to bring every bit of your anatomy into a clinical setting. I mean, you bring it with you, but you don't have to apply all of your anatomy in every clinical setting. The reason I say that is for considerations on efficiency only. Like, you should be smart. You should be hecka smart. You should be a body scholar. You should know it all. And just know which parts you need to pull from to get the job done. Job meaning get the client out of pain. Okay, so you don't have to be a running encyclopedia the whole time and think that every detail matters. Some practitioners get overwhelmed pretty quickly by doing that. I do too. So here's how we're going to parse it out. All right, hope this is making sense for you guys so far. Let's look at the lever of hip hyperextension. Okay, so extension is neutral joint action. Hyperextension of the hip. Hey, I see a couple more you came in live on YouTube. Glad you guys are here. Let me know you're here if you want to. So tell me, guys, what muscle is the main guy that does this joint action of hyperextension of the hip? This is a good one. This is easy. You guys got this. Glute max, Val says. Glute max. Cheryl's like, I knew that. She just said it faster than I could type. Right. It's easy. It's like, we got this. Always recommend going with the anatomy that you know, especially when you're trying to problem solve with your clients. So what we just did here was your problem solving. I'm asking you a question, you need to have an answer. Go with the easy answer first so that you can get your brain on board to continue to solve it with you. Don't pile drive yourself too quickly. I know some of you guys like to do that. All right, so glute max is the main guy who's contracting. Main guy, meaning the action maker of this joint action. The action maker is the muscle contracting. That would be glute max. The action is contraction. So far, we're talking lever system. Okay, it's also the start of reciprocal inhibition, but so far we're talking lever system. So if I need to have my client do hyperextension of the hip, I need them to be able to fire glute max fully to do that. If glute max isn't firing to do that, well, then I just stop there. I don't need to unpack the whole reciprocal inhibition bundle of joy. I could just focus on glute max and get a better result from this intended joint action. Does that make sense? Just make the main guy who's supposed to do the main thing do the thing. Lever system. I don't have to dive deep into reciprocal inhibition yet. Okay. But then on the other side of this joint's action being the contraction side, there's a main guy who's lengthening. Who's that? Who lengthens? Val did it again. Psoas. Lisa, good. All right, you guys got it. Good. Okay, so psoas is the main guy lengthening. Now, in a balanced lever, both the side that contracts and the side that lengthens do their respective roles equally. So glute max is fired up and contracting fully, and psoas is lengthening and willing to allow the contraction to happen. So now I'm still on lever system if my client can't completely do hyperextension of the hip, if it's not really working. However, the first place to start is always the contraction muscle, the guy who's doing the action. So if my client can't quite do hyperextension of the hip, either they can't do the movement or they can't do it without pain, and glute max is not firing, I'm still going to just pause there. Because without the main guy, the agonist of reciprocal inhibition, or the action taker on the lever doing the action, without him, there is no movement. So I got to always start with, is glute max doing hyperextension of the hip? If the answer is no, I pause there until he does. If the answer is yes, he is contracting, I got a rump shaker back here. Glute max is fired up, but hyperextension of the hip still isn't happening fully, or it's not happening without pain. Well, now I'm going to go on the other side of the lever. Is psoas willing to allow? Is he lengthening with as much willingness and gusto as glute max is powered up and creating the action? Are both parts of the lever doing equal measure of the action of the lever? And if the answer is no, stop there. I don't need to dive deep into reciprocal inhibition yet. All I need to do now is address psoas. And for all of us in the room, manual practitioners like to release everything, I say. Movement practitioners like to stretch everything, I like to say. Well, now's your chance, right? Psoas isn't allowing it to happen. Get in there, babies. Release away. Perfect use of the lever system and your preference to stretch and release everything. We got it. But then, before you even dive into reciprocal inhibition, you still want to balance the lever. Just because you released the psoas doesn't mean you reminded him of his job in action. So those of us who are manual practitioners, we do things passively. We do all the releasing, but the body hasn't learned how to regain its lever. That doesn't happen passively. That happens by moving. So if I've got someone on the table and I'm doing all the manual release work for their psoas, we're both happy about that, but my job is not done. My job is not done to get them out of pain if I'm recognizing that the lever is imbalanced, which led me to release the psoas in the first place. What I need to do next is return to the intention, which is to have glute max power up to hyperextend the hip while psoas relearns how to allow that to happen. I'm still on lever, but I've got to finish the job. And for movement providers, same thing goes. Is glute max still doing a full job now that the lever has been shifted? Because now psoas is in the game. Psoas wasn't in the game before. Sometimes what happens in discrepancies is that glute max will power up because he's trying to get psoas to lengthen more than he's trying to create the joint action. I know that sounds crazy, but it happens when things go wrong, right? The body starts making concessions in places. And so that's usually where we're faced with, what do I do? I'll take us back to the start here. What you do is remind yourself of the anatomy. What's supposed to be happening here when all is right in the world? When all is right in the world, glute max is contracting, psoas is lengthening, and they're doing it in equal measure. But if I'm here and glute max is like freak out contract, he might not be trying to do the joint action as much as he might be trying to get the other side of the lever to play. So really both sides need to be reminded of their equal measure role. And in movement practitioners, that's what you would do. Is glute max firing enough and appropriately without overboard taking over? And is psoas allowing? And I would say the same is true for manual practitioners too. You gotta finish the lever. Okay. Is this making sense to you guys? Like, just use the lever. Go ahead, Gary. What you got?
So what does that look like when glute max is overextending, over trying too hard? I mean, how do we recognize that versus just a regular contraction?
Yeah, it's such a good question. Your answer is in part of your question, actually. If it's not a regular contraction is number one, right? If you're
Hmm.
recognizing that glute max like is almost shaking, quivering, doesn't feel
Ah,
regular, but there's not a whole lot of
hmm.
result for all that hubbub. Well, there's one
Okay.
indicator. There's one indicator.
Hmm.
Another indicator is if there's discomfort, because a muscle doesn't
Hmm.
hurt when it contracts. Muscle also doesn't hurt when it lengthens. How do we know that? Because we're designed that way. Anything that's in our original design does not come with pain. It's when that original design is off. So to your question, how do you know if it's off? Well, there's pain involved. It's
Hmm.
another sign. Does this make sense? Hey, Perry, how you doing?
Yes.
Make sense, Gary? Okay, good. Beautiful question.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Any other questions so far on how to work the lever to know when it's the lever and nothing but the lever yet? Okay, good. And still, you can have clarity around the lever and still solve a problem and only need the lever for that so far. So my intention was to illustrate that for you so that we don't have to get buried too deep into reciprocal inhibition and still create a result when we're presented with something's off. Sometimes when clients present with something that's a little off, there's a dysfunction in their function or pain involved in their function. Sometimes what happens when we don't know what to do is we pile drive ourselves with information too quickly, and then now we're pile drived. So we can't actually like sort and sift through what we're thinking through to get to the answer. I wanted to illustrate that you can still create a result for someone when they are presenting with something seemingly complex or symptomatic and not have to get so buried deep in it for yourself. Part of how you do that is by burying yourself deep in knowledge so you can tell the difference. Like, this is simple right now. I don't have to go so deep. Or this feels complicated and my simple approach isn't getting a result. I need to go deeper, right? So, and you would make that choice for yourself, you know, in the moment with the client that you're working on. All right, making sense so far? All right, good. So now let's say, for example, we're still on the same joint action and our client can do hyperextension of the hip. Glute max seems to be on board for the job. He's working hard, but not being a jerk about it. He's not overwhelmed by anything. And psoas is lengthening, that he's there, and we don't have any other indication that psoas isn't on board to lengthen. And yet there's still something a little off. Something a little off. Commonly what's off, but it's not the only thing, but commonly what's off is a hamstring symptom. Hamstring symptom. So if we start looking at hyperextension of the hip as the action of glute max, who helps glute max do hyperextension of the hip? What muscles? Hamstrings. Yeah, hamstrings will help. They're designed to help. This is the part of the anatomy that we do want to know. There is no muscle that works by himself. Even when we streamline to just approach the lever system simply, one for the other, like a seesaw, even when we're doing that, that's not how the body's wired. But we can approach a solution by just simplifying that for ourselves until it's not the two guys on the teeter-totter, until it's, you know, the other guys. So we get to know the anatomy. We get to know that the hamstrings help glute max do the job. They're not the main guys, and they shouldn't be the main guys, but they do help. In order for full hyperextension of the hip, it's both glute max and hamstrings, but in that order. Okay. And we get lots of clients with hamstring, I'll call it issues. They like to call it tightness, but it's really not always tight, like to release tight. Sometimes it's a different type of sensation or a different type of setup, if you will, but the sensation can still feel tight. And we know that because we talk tension types here. If you need a refresher on that, go back into the YouTube channel. I got tons of training on tension types. It's really worthwhile to know. So let's say, for example, I got glute max working, psoas working, the lever is okay, but there's still something a little off. And in this instance, this make-believe instance, that's common, I got a hamstring issue. Based on reciprocal inhibition, and I already gave you this answer, but we're just using our anatomy. Based on reciprocal inhibition, what's the job of the hamstrings in hyperextension of the hip? Based on reciprocal inhibition, what's their role? What, Val? You're muted, darling. That was more than one word, so my lip reading skills are limited when it's more than one word. You can't unmute. Let me see if I give you a pop-up. Does that help you? There you go.
Assists in hyperextension.
Okay, assists in hyperextension. We're in reciprocal inhibition now.
Right.
Say it one more time, Val.
It assists the glute max in hyperextension.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So in reciprocal inhibition, we call that body of muscle land synergists. They're helper bees. The helper bees are the synergists. They're helping the main guy do the job. Now let's review. What's the job? Hamstrings are helping hyperextend the hip. So what are they doing to hyperextend the hip?
Contraction.
Contraction. So now we're back to, okay, this is what those muscles need to be doing. So if hamstrings aren't contracting, and when they're supposed to be, could that be a cause for symptoms?
Yes, or for
For sure. So we've now used reciprocal inhibition on the same joint action that's disrupted from being beautiful and pain-free. Now we've targeted hamstrings, and now we know what they're supposed to do based on reciprocal inhibition. Reciprocal inhibition tells us they are synergists, which means they help the action. The action is contraction. So now we know hamstrings, you're supposed to be contracting right now. Are you? So why does this matter? Because for manual practitioners, releasing them with your thumbs is probably not going to get you what you need if they're supposed to be contracting. So now we've taken all of our efficiency and we've wiped it out. And now we're spending minutes doing something that doesn't need to be done and could probably make it worse as well. And for movement practitioners, if hamstrings are supposed to be contracting and you're having them do that with hyperextension of the hip as the job, they don't have to do that by themselves because that's not their main job. So the body can just circumvent them. So that's not the way to reintroduce them back into full function by pairing them up with an agonist. The way to address that as a manual practitioner, as a movement practitioner, is to find something that the hamstrings do on their own where they serve as the agonist. So that it's them doing all the work and they don't have the ability to pass it off on the big guy. The agonists of reciprocal inhibition. The main guy that does the action. When the main guy is glute max and the helper bees are hamstrings, but the hamstrings aren't contracting, they're not doing their helper role. Getting them to partner with a main guy like glute max is not going to get them to do their main job because they're passing it off on the big guy. They're not isolated to just have to do all the lifting themselves, all the contracting. And when I say isolate, it's in context, my friends, because remember, no muscle is wired alone. But in the same way that we use the lever, whoops, almost threw Murph's head on the floor. In the same way we use the lever to identify if glute max is contracting and psoas is lengthening, we sort of isolated just in our vision though. We know that it's not wired that way, but in our vision, we're now focused on just two muscles doing an equal teeter-totter, right? If I know that I now need to create strength in the synergists, I need to find a teeter-totter that they're the main guy for. I just saw it click. Did that click for you guys? You're all making, okay, good. So now I'm still using the lever system to figure out what's going wrong with hyperextension of the hip. But now I've identified it's not the main two teeter-totter kids on the playground. Now I'm using reciprocal inhibition to broaden my view into synergist muscles who are also supposed to contract. I know that because I know what synergists do. And now I'm going to take just those muscles and put them on a teeter-totter. You get it? Okay. So I've gone lever system, reciprocal inhibition, lever system to solve the same problem. And the same thing goes for the other side of the lever. Okay. So we just focused on the guys who do the contracting. When I'm in hyperextension of the hip and psoas is lengthening, who else is lengthening?
Rectus femoris.
Rectus femoris, right, exactly. So now we've broadened our lever system knowledge to reciprocal inhibition, helper bees, partners in crime, all the good stuff. And now, would it make sense that if I have a hamstring issue, I would also have a rectus femoris issue? Would it make sense that those two would kind of partner up together and create a problem, a problemo somewhere?
Possibly.
Okay, how come?
Because they're working in symphony.
Because they're another lever of their own.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So I take a lever widen it to see reciprocal inhibition players, and I narrow it right back down to lever again to solve the problem. What's the problem? The problem will be answered for me in my exploration of lever easier than it will be answered for me keeping track of all the players of reciprocal inhibition. Here's why. Just like we said at the beginning, if I focus on the main guy doing the joint action, I know he's contracting. He has to contract. The other guy has to lengthen. So now I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. Am I releasing something or am I strengthening something? When I went into hamstrings, if hamstrings aren't helping do what? The joint action, which means they'll be doing what? Contracting. So now I know what I get to do for them. They get to contract, and their exact other side of their teeter-totter gets to lengthen. And because we know lever, again, is equal measure, equal players, just like in a teeter-totter, they both have to be playing equally for the teeter-totter to go up and down. Otherwise, one kid's hanging out in the air and the other guy's down on the ground, and neither of them are having any fun. Except maybe the kid on the ground might be happy because the guy on top is panicking and kicking his legs and can't go anywhere. But other than that, it's not really any fun. Okay, so if we're talking about movement, we want it to be equal, right? Equal players on both sides of the lever. And if I know what they're supposed to be doing, action as contraction or action as lengthen and allow, then I know what to do for that muscle. I don't always release all of them. Sometimes I need to engage them. And this right here, this idea around lever system and reciprocal inhibition is why we have so many different techniques and why there is not one technique that works for everything. No, it's PNF, it's PNF, it's always PNF, it's always PNF. PNF is the answer. Okay, well, PNF releases, and if that's what's needed, you're right, it's perfect. But if I'm actually looking at the guy on the side of the lever who's supposed to contract, PNF's not my technique. That tool won't work. It's not that it's not a good tool, it's that that's not the tool to do that job. What I need now is more like muscle activation. I need to make the muscle contract. I need to find a way to encourage him to do his job. I need to stimulate those spindles until they act like they've got elastic qualities in them, which they do. Techniques that do that are the technique that I need to do for that instance. So it's one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of just collecting a bunch of techniques, just train in technique and train in technique and train in technique. I love techniques, guys. I have plenty of my own. But we need to know when to apply them and then not be mad at the technique for not solving your problem for you. We are the think tank in the room. We get to figure out what's going on and then grab the right tool to get the job done. It's not the technique. It's our thinking about what's needed that is the real, yeah, that. Does that make sense to you guys? Is that landing for you? Yes? Okay, beautiful. So I'd love to hear from you. Hi guys, I see two more of you came on YouTube. I'm glad you guys are still here hanging out. How's it landing for you guys watching on the live stream? What's landing for you? And also my friends here in the club seats, tell me what's clicking for you. What are you hearing that's piecing this together for you in an easier way than before? I've got more to give you and I want to make sure this is all digesting.
I think simplifying it, going back to the lever instead.
Go back to the lever. Okay.
That's pretty much what I was going to say. It kind of simplifies it, you know, the lever system and then going a little deeper into the reciprocal inhibition and then still looking at the lever system, you know, going back to, you know, the basics of that.
Perfect. Okay,
Yeah.
good. I love this. I love that it's becoming simplified. You know, that lights me up.
Simple
Gary?
makes it easier.
What, Belle?
Simple makes it easier.
Right? Exactly. Yeah, I would say this too, guys. Like when in the work that we're doing, it's not that it's easy. I don't want us to think like, well, it doesn't feel easy for me, so then maybe I'm, you know, don't do that storyline. It's not easy, but it is simple. but you get to learn and know, learn and know, learn and know, and then it becomes simple, right? So don't be hard on yourselves if you're still in the learning. You're in the gathering stage. That's great. Good. Gather away. Gary?
What is, in the cases we've been talking about, one of your favorite muscle activators?
What's one of my favorite muscle activators? What do you mean by
Yeah.
that?
Well, if like the hamstrings aren't activating,
Yeah.
aren't contracting, then we're back to techniques, but
Oh,
it's the end piece of, okay, how do you what's your activator go to? Is
yeah.
there an activator go to?
Yeah, no, I get the question. It's a good question. So I am both a manual and a movement practitioner. So I can, ride the line between both. That said, I do
Mhm.
not have, I have much more fluency with my hands. I don't use like machines or weights or, reformers or anything like that. Although I could, I'm trained as a personal trainer. I just don't do that in my space. So if that were something that you would want to do as a movement practitioner, do that. As a manual practitioner, and I know you are, Gary, so that's probably where you're asking. What I like to do is go end to end and then have the client engage the muscle between the two endpoints. Like I'm giving their nervous system a focal point on origin and insertion and then have them contract. And that would be how and what kind of contraction is largely dependent on what muscle we're working on. So if I was, for example, targeting hamstrings, they would be face down on the table and I would have ischial tuberosity to, back of knee, or depending on which hamstring it is. And I would have them just ever so slightly engage that muscle. So I'm not doing big movement. And I would say for movement providers in the space here, smaller is often better. Just because you can add excess weight doesn't mean you should. If the muscle doesn't know what he's supposed to do, he can easily just divert that over to the synergists. Like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I need somebody to help me. And then he will call on help. And the same thing goes for bigger movements. Like the bigger the movement, the more reciprocal inhibitors. God, I'm totally making up words. Is that even a word? The more players of reciprocal inhibition are involved, the bigger the movement. So the bigger the joint action, the bigger the movement, the more of those are at play. So I like the way that I do it as a manual practitioner, even when I'm playing the role of a movement practitioner, because it targets the muscle more readily. Sometimes also if there's a lot of weakness in the muscle, atrophy, or there has been a Golgi tendon organ response, I'll also manually encourage the muscle at the tendon to contract. If you're a movement provider, don't do that. That's out of your scope. And also what I'll do, Gary, is sometimes I'll just act as a fulcrum. So like if I'm targeting the hamstrings, my hand will then be on the back of their ankle. Again, they're prone, face down. My hand will be on the back of their ankle, and I'm just giving them a little resistance on the ankle. I don't have to be on the hamstring to make the hamstring spindles respond. I just need to get them to isolate the joint action that would get that muscle to do that job with a little bit of resistance. So it depends on what's going on with the client, but those are a couple of the approaches I would take as both a manual and a movement practitioner.
Thank you.
Does that answer it for you?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. You're welcome. Hey, Rhonda, could you use knee flexion to activate the hamstrings instead of rectus femoris? Could you use, my first answer was yes, and then you put in rectus femoris, and I was like, what? Could you use knee flexion to activate the hamstrings? Yes, that's like what I just said with Gary. Instead of rectus femoris. Rectus femoris would be what part of the lever, Rhonda? What would rectus femoris be doing? Anybody here in club seats? What does rectus femoris do in knee flexion?
Lengthens.
Lengthens, yeah. So we wouldn't use him to activate the hamstrings. We would only target rectus femoris if he wasn't allowing the hamstrings to contract. And that goes back to, we get to assess like what's going on. Is it that the hamstrings aren't powered up to do knee flexion? Or is there something going on in rectus femoris where he's like, I'll give you an inch, but I won't give you a mile. And then in which case, I don't need to target hamstrings. I need to get him to allow the hamstrings to power up. And then in those instances, again, we've already said this, just repeating it for us to lock it in. In those instances where you recognize that one side of the lever is not equal playing to the other side of the lever, the seesaw is out, one kid's dangling up in the air and the other guy's hoarding him down on the bottom. Once you equal them out, then you need to keep going. Meaning now that I've lengthened and allowed rectus femoris to create the ability for hamstrings to contract, now I need to get hamstrings to contract. Just because they've been allowed now doesn't mean they're strong enough. Who knows how long they've been impeded? We know the atrophy process begins in 24 hours. If rectus fem's been on, jerk alert for a week or two after an injury, well, then these spindles started to atrophy a week ago. So now he's weaker. Just because we gave up the goat and they're permitted doesn't mean they're strong enough to. Also doesn't mean that rectus femoris remembers what lengthen and then contraction is. Lengthen and contract. He's got to be reminded of that too. Doesn't take long to remind them because they're designed that way. We're not teaching them something they don't already know. We're reminding them of what they used to know. So it doesn't take long. You don't have to do like a whole workout class, but you do want to make sure you target that lever. Equal players on the teeter-totter. Rhonda said hip flexion. I just moved the lever seesaw to the hip joint to the knee. Right, you moved it to the knee, Rhonda, and still hamstrings contract in knee flexion and rectus femoris lengthens in knee flexion. So we wouldn't use a lengthening muscle to help the joint action. The muscle that does the joint action is the muscle contracting. The muscle that it's allowing is the one that's lengthening. So I hope that you're probably typing as we speak, Rhonda. So I hope that answered it. If not, you'll come back to me and let me know. Okay. Any other questions, guys? It sounds like it's really landing for you. Got it? Okay. I want to talk now about stabilizers. Because if we are talking about reciprocal inhibition, and we just simplified out when we don't need to go that deep. But sometimes we do need to go that deep. Like we just went into Synergist land. Stabilizers get overlooked a lot. Stabilizers have a little bit more. You got it, Rhonda. Good. Okay, glad that worked for you. Stabilizers get overlooked a lot. Stabilizers, I think, are probably the hardest to understand. Nothing's hard. We just need to be, using our think tanks. Nothing's hard, but stabilizers are not in the lever per se. They could be stabilizing the joint, but they could also be stabilizing the body to get we talked about last week. It could be the opposite side of the body functioning as a stabilizer, whichever one is grounding, but it could also be near and around. Near and around, when I was learning reciprocal inhibition, was harder. It was much easier for me to see muscles that just stabilized a joint, because stabilizing a joint is not moving a joint, but it's stabilizing so the joint can move. We talked about that last week and the week before. It's also easy for me to see, was easy for me to see at first, the muscles that have to be present for the thing that I'm doing to happen. We talked last week about the muscles in this leg have to be holding this leg down if I'm going to pick this leg up off the ground. These muscles have to stabilize my whole body on the ground for this one to be lifted off the ground. Stabilizers. Okay, that's easy to see. They're like separate. But then when the stabilizers became near and around the lever, I got like, I'm in the sauce. I can't see the forest through the trees at first. So we're going to tiptoe our way in there today and see what happens. Let's go back to hyperextension of the hip. Yes? Hyperextension of the hip. Let's just list out what are the muscles of reciprocal inhibition so far. Who's the agonist, the antagonist, and the synergist? Go ahead, guys. Who is it?
Glute. Should we type it?
Nope, say it.
Glute max is the agonist.
Beautiful.
Psoas is the antagonist, lengthening.
Love it.
And hamstrings are the synergist helping the agonist.
Perfect. You guys all got that? As
Mhm.
Cheryl was listing them out, or you're like, check, I got this, check, I'm a star, check, I'm a superstar. Great. Okay, now what would be the stabilizers in hyperextension of the hip? What muscles would have to be holding down the fort in this area for hyperextension of the hip to occur? What would be the stabilizers? Interesting.
Deep hip rotators or the opposite leg because it's holding up the body. Because we're
Okay.
not floating in air.
All right.
So-
If we were doing the opposite leg again, like we did last week, then yes, we would be looking at the opposite leg. For today, we're going to take our conversation on stabilizers a little closer to the spinny sauce.
Okay, that's what I wondered where you were going.
Yeah. And what is stabilizing here for this joint to be in hyperextension? What has to happen here for hyperextension to occur? What has to happen?
Support.
Oh, man.
Support. Glute min, Gary. What about
Yeah.
glute?
It's holding the hip down from rotating too far.
Holding the hip from rotating too far?
Yeah, I'm not sure
You're so close.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're so close. So what was the word you used, Val? Stability?
Pardon?
Did you use the word stability?
Yes,
Stability.
to stabilize the hip.
S-
So I'm going to go on a limb and say iliacus and the deep hip rotators.
Okay, why are you on deep hip rotators?
They're supporting the rest of the pelvis, the sacrum, and the trochanter.
Okay, you had a question mark at the end there, I heard in your voice.
Yeah, this is where I
know.
need more help. That's why I
know.
said I'm going on a limb here.
I know. It's where I used to do that spinny thing too. I already said that. I totally get it, guys.
Yeah.
That's why we're diving in so that we can all be clear together. It's not
I'm
deep
thinking
six.
both sides.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's not deep six. Here's why. Here's one of the giveaways. If a muscle and a muscle group like deep six is responsible solely for a phasic action like deep six,
Mhm.
their job in life is that phasic action.
Okay, so they wouldn't double.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So again, we just used our anatomy to answer the question. Notice how fun this is when we know our anatomy. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Is it glute med? Because it does have intrinsic abilities as well, and it would hold the pelvis in a stable position.
It holds what part of the pelvis in a stable position?
The innominate.
Yes. So this bone, as we're going to use our anatomy to wire this out. Good job. There's a couple others too, but this is how we got to this answer. There's more than one stabilizer. That's why there's an S at the end. This bone is the bone where the socket for the ball of the femur meets that is making that joint action that we're even talking about. So we're talking about hyperextension of the hip, which is this bone and this bone. Stabilizing, you said it, Rhonda, glute med, yep. Stabilizing is not just stabilization of the joint socket, but the stabilizing of the bones that make up the joint. So joints aren't structures on their own. They're where two bones meet, right? We know that from our principles, from our anatomy principles. So it's this bone and this bone that must be in a healthy relationship with each other for something dramatic like hyperextension, one of them to move independently of the other.
Okay.
So we don't have specifically joint stabilizers, right? That's like sometimes people think that stabilizers of reciprocal inhibition stabilize joints, but we know that we don't have them specifically here. But we do have muscles that hold this bone like in anchored position.
So stabilizing of structure, would that be a good thing for a note?
Stabilizing of structure, yep. That's another great way to I spy what a stabilizer is in reciprocal inhibition. And for shots method practitioners, you guys know that that means these two bones must be structurally balanced and in alignment with each other. So if I'm going to restore the function of hyperextension of the hip, and I've now decided that it's a stabilizer of reciprocal inhibition, I need to also recognize that if those two bones are out of alignment from each other, if they're not balanced in relationship to each other, I can work on hyperextension of the hip till the cows come home. It's not going to happen. And we know that from our formula, alignment, strength, and function. And we're working on that formula in the club this month. So for some of you who've had that training already, it's there for your review. If you haven't had it already, I don't know, Gary, if you've had it or not, that training is available right now in our club. That's what we're working on this month. And our club, for those of you who have not been joining us there yet, is our community where we do training every day. And we have a focus of the month and a full course or several smaller courses that we pin together, and we go over them together in a month. I train on them. You guys train on them. The advocates meet with you every week to get you extra training. We workshop it out. And so that formula helps us know, like, wait a minute, I don't need to be focused on glute max here. I need to be focused on the alignment of these bones. And what do I do about that? So once we start using our anatomy, then we know what steps we're supposed to be taking in a treatment setting. Not every muscle requires that you slave labor over top of it. And if I could just get massage therapists to really wrap their hands around that in this lifetime so that they can work easier and not burn out so fast and create better results, then I would be happier because you guys would be happier and you'd have more bandwidth to do more work. So the stabilizers, just taking this back to our conversation for today, I mean, it's all our conversation, but to this specific point of the conversation, if I need to focus on a stabilizer, I need to recognize a muscle's relationship to the bone and that it attaches to or that it's responsible for on either side of that joint. And is that joint alignment, is the relationship between those two bones set up in a way that the phasic agonist can actually do the joint action? Because if the answer to that is no, even though we're at the end of the reciprocal inhibition discovery route, we're actually at the beginning of what the treatment should be. Because without that alignment, you're not going to get muscles to contract equally. Everything that we said so far up until this part of the conversation about hyperextension of the hip, it's either glute max not, or psoas not, or hamstrings not, or rectus fem not. Everything that we just unpacked together from agonists, antagonists, and synergists implied that there was a balanced relationship in the structure of the two bones that make up that joint. It was implied. But as soon as that relationship is askew, the lever can't actually work fully. And it's not the muscle's fault. It's the relationship of the bones that those muscles move. And so again, that's why I want you guys to dive deeper into that formula and, you know, those of you who are in the club, and if you're not in the club, come join us so you can take the deep dive too. Dive into that training so you can start seeing, wait, what is the order of things here? What should I be looking at? Is it lever system? Is it reciprocal inhibition? Or is it structural balance? Here's another thing I want you to know. Regardless of which one it is first, they all need to be addressed. But it's in what order that sets you up for success. When you address them in the right order, you'll solve the problem. When you don't address them in the right order, you'll spin and spin, and your client will have to keep coming back, and the pain will be recurring. Okay? Guys got that? You guys are taking notes, so that must have been, whatever I just said must have been good. Okay, good. I'm glad you guys got that. Okay. We have just
coalesced it.
I coalesced it. Oh, good. I love when it all synthesizes together. Okay, my friends, any last questions while we're here together? Any last questions? We went through the lever system. We expanded our view into reciprocal inhibition. We narrowed it right back down to the lever to know what to do. Do I need to activate? Do I need to lengthen? Do I need to do both? Then we expanded that into functions that we could balance the teeter-totter. Then we went into stabilizers and the 3 different places that the stabilizers can be classified and should be looked for. And then we talked about what happens when, in today's instance of stabilizers, the joint that we're focused on for movement is not aligned. And then we brought it right back to all 3. Go ahead, Lisa.
As there are some more stabilizers, I thought that it was plural, more
Oh,
than
yes.
glute-med. Like
Yeah, for this joint action for hyperextension of the hip. Yeah. And
so
we
like
could
piriformis, because it's right in there.
so
Up to the
we
sacrum.
yeah, that was Val's guess too, that piriformis and
Yeah,
my
that's right,
answer.
the deep 6. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was deep 6, and that's largely a phasic action group, so probably less likely to have stabilizing responsibilities or roles. Although, this might get a little too dicey given we have 2 minutes left.
Yeah.
Although, when we have bones that are askew from each other, not balanced, every muscle that attaches to them can fire like a stabilizer, because really what they're trying to do is bring the bones back into balance. Doesn't mean they're stabilizers of reciprocal inhibition. It just means they're up to trying to fix the problem, because the body's always trying to do that. But back to your original question, in hyperextension of the hip, you guys pegged it. I knew you have it because you talked about this bone needing to be aligned in a way that allows the extremity, the appendicular skeleton, to fly freely. So other muscles that this bone depends on would be pelvic floor, right? Piriformis, or not piriformis, gosh, sorry guys, psoas,
Iliacus.
iliacus. Yep, all of the muscles that are responsible for holding this guy in this position while there's movement happening around him are all on board to be stabilizers. And they are less likely to be strictly phasic prime movers. Prime movers would be an agonist. That's another way that we can tell. And more likely to have either a role at the joint or a role in stabilization or an intrinsic classification. And so pelvic floor obviously would be intrinsic, and then you roll out in that way. Got it? Got it? At least you got the answer, and you could always.
Yeah, got the answer.
Okay, great. Val, you brewing on a question?
No, it's kind of like the glue that helps hold it together. So yeah, I was right on the iliacus, at least
You
for
were.
opposite side. So
Yep.
I should have known glute-med, but I
Well,
don't know why the deep 6 came into my head. And
that's okay. It was good learning for all of us. And for shots method practitioners, you do the same thing with stabilizers, the same process that you do with probable cause. What would probably be happening in this muscle that would prevent him from doing his role as a stabilizer? You just take yourself through the same probable cause process. So I don't know. Is it pelvic floor? Is it psoas? Is it iliacus? Is it glute-med? I don't know. You do. What's happening? What needs to be happening? And then go from there. Okay. All right, my friends. This was a fun hour. I'm so glad you guys were here with me. Thanks for joining. We'll be here again, same time, same station next week.
awesome.
All right, guys. I'll see you guys then. Bye for now.
Thanks, Nina. Bye.
My pleasure. Bye, guys.